Okay, good day, Dad. I figured we can start this podcast off by just quickly recapping all the evidence that is pointing towards that Ukraine was involved in this Crocus terrorist attack. So could you quickly do that first? Let's go through what we've already talked about before, do a quick summary recap, and then we'll talk about some of the new evidence and then go from there.
Okay, sure. Well, of course, I think the most obvious and I think probably the strongest piece of evidence pointing towards Ukraine that we've learned of so far, of course, is simply the fact that the perpetrators were fleeing in the direction of Ukraine. They were on a road that went to the Ukraine border and no other place. So that right there, of course, makes anybody who's at all objective at least suspect Ukrainian involvement. I think also, kind of just looking at the larger geopolitical situation, it's just that you have to ask, when a terrorist attack of this sort occurs, what kind of conflict is the country involved in, right? I mean, we know there was a series of terrorist attacks in Russia back in the 1990s and early 2000s, but everybody knew what it was about. Russia was at war, in Chechnya and fighting jihadists in places like, in the southern Caucasus. So there was just no question. There was an open conflict, and there were angry, desperate men that wanted to do harm to Russia. But what is the conflict that Russia's involved now? That's the answer is obvious. It's Ukraine, right? That's where you're going to be a lot of angry, desperate people, people with an incentive to lash out. And truth be told, there's really been very little conflict, on any sort of major scale between Russia and jihadists in recent years. I mean, most recently, you have to go back to Syria,
Right.
but that chapter pretty much ended several years ago. So, I mean, it just contrasts with the kind of attacks that we saw by ISIS. That was when it was at the time of the defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And, they lashed out. Everybody understood what was going on. Yeah. They gave a reason. It was because of,
Right.
the West's involvement.
So basically saying who has a clear motive,
Right.
and
So
it's the Ukrainians.
exactly. So yeah, evidence, motive. Okay. Right. Both of those point to Ukraine. But then new evidence has come up recently. First of all, we learned it was the investigative committee in Russia that payments were made to the perpetrators via cryptocurrency from Ukraine. I think they said actually it was from nationalists in Ukraine. So they didn't point to Ukrainian authorities in particular, or Ukrainian government officials. They said Ukrainian nationalists. And, what that means exactly, we don't know yet. But there's another definite link to Ukraine. Again, it's not conclusive. It's possible, that this money passed through Ukraine. It could have been coming from somewhere else. It may not have been, payments. Again, they do say Ukrainian nationalists, but what does that mean? Maybe a Ukrainian nationalist was running the platform or whatever, the exchange platform that was used in Ukraine. At this point, it's too early. But the fact is, when we combine it with motive and with the other evidence we have, it does strengthen the case. That Ukraine was behind this. And then another piece of evidence was revealed today. I think it was by the FSB. They said that the gunman had said that the mastermind, who they hadn't met but had been communicating with them, via these online channels, had told them to flee to Ukraine. Again, that seems rather obvious, but again, it just piles on. It's not like they just chose to head in that direction because it was the closest international border, but they had been specifically told to go there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos of when they captured these gunmen, but they were clearly beaten up,
Yeah.
mistreated horribly, tortured. So would you say that the evidence of anything that they say would be slightly compromised?
Well,
I
I
would
think,
say at least slightly
yeah,
is compromised if
right,
it's under duress, under torture.
right. Yeah, well, we don't know if those statements were made under duress or under torture. Yeah, it does appear that the soldiers that captured them, mistreated them terribly. I think we can understand why, but I would say that it's shows a lack of discipline and a lack of
Right.
professionalism.
And also hurts your case if
Yeah,
you want to
right,
get anything out of them.
right.
People can just say, "Well, look, I saw those videos.
Yeah,
You
so
can't. These Russians beat the crap out of them. You can't trust it."
uh-huh. Right, yeah. Again, we don't have any evidence that that's happening now, but it does. I agree. The fact that they were clearly mistreated at the time of capture.
Right. You also
Yeah.
said previously that there were phone calls being made. Right. That they tracked some communication as well.
Right. Well, again, we have this. Yeah, it's not clear because I haven't. I've heard this. I think I heard that from Scott Ritter, and I don't know where he got his information from. I haven't seen it. I think I saw one other source, which I can't remember now, but it wasn't an official source. So we'll have to say this is rumor at this point. But it would explain why, for example, Putin said that a window was being opened.
Right.
That if indeed they were making calls across the border, that would be maybe the information that he was talking about.
Right. Another thing that maybe, so apologies, Doge. Another thing that I could also maybe be pointing towards Ukrainian involvement would you say would be the how quickly the United States and Western nations were to say that this is ISIS-K and there was no Ukrainian involvement, doing it so quickly that made them look guilty.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they did it. I think made the first statement something like 50 minutes after the shooting began. I mean, it was just absurd. I in the end, you'd have to say just very amateurish. If you decided that what your narrative is going to be, what your story is going to be, that you're going to push in the international arena, you probably want to wait a bit and to make it a little bit more believable. And the fact that they began with a story and they ran with it just even before the fires have been put out, or the shooting. Maybe the shooting had ended there, but only by a few minutes. It's certainly it simply just reveals that this is not a serious accusation. It was clearly an attempt to deflect attention, and why do you want to deflect attention from Ukraine? And then when you couple that with some of the statements that have been made earlier, especially by Victoria Nuland about the nasty surprise, and she also made some statement about about Ukraine's extraordinary success and asymmetric warfare, that she wanted to continue to support. And when we're talking about, I think she meant by asymmetric, it was unconventional, irregular, therefore really terroristic attacks.
Do you think this is maybe one of the reasons she left?
You just have to wonder. That's all I can say. You just have to wonder. It does seem like quite a coincidence. She made that last statement about the nasty surprise, and then a couple days later, the State Department, or was the U.S. Embassy, issued the warning.
Has there been any accusation from Russia seems to be not directly accusing Ukraine, but definitely pushing forward? What is it? Has there been anything specific coming from the Russian government saying that it's the Ukrainians, they have the cryptocurrency? Right. Is there anything that they're saying definitively that this is from Ukraine?
Well, okay, there is it was, I think, the investigative committee that established the cryptocurrency connection. It was the FSB that said that the gunman had confessed that it was someone, the mastermind, the unseen mastermind that had instructed them to flee towards Ukraine. So that's, those are official statements. And then, of course, it was Putin himself that said that, according to preliminary information, a window was being opened in Ukraine.
Okay.
So, these
are official.
Yeah. Now, none of them actually say that it was the Ukrainian government, or, maybe that's, it's possible that it was a non-state actor, possible that it was, a terrorist organization operating in the territory of Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine has got all kinds of extreme nationalist groups that are kind of, that are quasi-official. And it could have been one, or may have been one particular agency, or maybe a group within an agency that was rogue. I mean, those are all possibilities.
Have there been any direct accusations or links, evidence that shows the CIA or MI6 involvement?
Well, it's just the very fact that the CIA is so tight with Ukraine, makes you wonder. And then this warning that was issued also suggests, as we said earlier, that U.S. intelligence had gotten wind of this. And then there's been the hand-wringing articles in the past, the leaks that have been made to the New York Times and the Washington Post, in which the intelligence source, told the reporter that, yeah, we're aware the Ukrainians are doing these crazy things. We told them not to, but they keep on doing it. And it's an obvious effort that's been made in the past. It was just maybe a month ago there was that long article in the New York Times, about the CIA listening post. But again, that article contained the same kind of, let's say, expression of disapproval of Ukrainian methods. In other words, they know that what the Ukrainians are doing, and they know that it would be best for them not to be associated with it. So they've made efforts. It looks like those were proactive efforts to distance themselves from Ukraine. Now, did they know about the specific attack? Well, again, there was that warning that was issued.
Right. Well, the United States was very quick to say that it was ISIS-K. Right. And the rest of the Western world has gone with it.
Right.
How do we feel about that theory, ISIS-K, and what evidence and data has been presented to prove that it is ISIS-K, or that there was no Ukrainian involvement? Because the U.S. and the West was very quick to say there was no Ukrainian involvement. Was there any evidence presented to show that there was no Ukrainian involvement?
Well, yeah, it's hard to prove a negative. So yeah, so no evidence has been put forward that there was no Ukrainian involvement. I mean, there is evidence, of course, that ISIS-K, or whatever that is, really, again, there are a lot of these attacks that are carried out by somebody who just declares loyalty to ISIS, and it's not clear that it was actually, to what extent this organization even exists. There are a lot of questions about ISIS-K and what it in fact is. It seems to a lot of people, I mean, not just dissidents or whatever, saying that it is perhaps a creation, or at least very closely linked to U.S. intelligence.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but is it true that the United States, the CIA, was involved in supporting ISIS in Syria, ISIS and Al-Qaeda? Because I heard that, and I know it's a quagmire there.
Right.
We arm one guys, and they're the good guys for a while, then they become the bad guys, or the bad guys become the good guys. Is that true? Were we supporting ISIS for a while in Syria? Because I know Putin and Russia were fighting ISIS with Bashar al-Assad in Syria.
Right. Well, we certainly fought ISIS, both in Iraq and Syria. And I think there's very little of ISIS left. But oddly enough, the little of it that remains is in U.S. and Turkish-controlled territories. So there seems to be an odd tolerance. I mean, the U.S. has been there now for many, many years. Has simply seized the most fertile and part of Syria, and the part that also produces oil. We've been there, and we've occupied that territory, and yet ISIS still has a presence there. It doesn't have a presence within, Syria, the part of Syria that's controlled by the Assad government. Now in Afghanistan, a lot of people have pointed out that this ISIS-K, which is to say, I think the Islamic State of Khorasan, very oddly, has never attacked the Americans. You would think that a jihadist organization in Afghanistan would be attacking U.S. military targets. It never did. But it did attack the Taliban, but also Iran and Russia, and I think I've heard China too. Chinese.
So oddly, all kind of enemies of the United States.
Right. So it
is a little suspicious. I wasn't aware of this. So
yeah, no, it's very true.
So would it be too crazy to think that somehow we are involved with ISIS?
Well, no, it wouldn't. There.
It sounds so crazy to say, but I just don't
I don't think it would be too crazy. That at least, I don't think, again, maybe there are a lot of things that I thought my government could never do, and it turns out that it did. A lot of things I thought, well, we would never go that far, and it turns out that, oh yes, we did go that far. And still, I don't think we would go that far. It just seems so reckless and so, frankly, evil. I don't think we would do that, but there may be at least, like rogue elements, and some of these people that are stationed out there,
right?
In CIA land, they have their contacts, and maybe they, whatever, they thought they hate the Russians, and they feed this idea to to their jihadist counterparts there in Central Asia. Do this, we'll help you out. You'll get money and. Yeah,
I mean, when I think about Victoria Nuland, what does she do? What does the CIA do? What does our government do? We don't really fight these, these real wars against real armies. We do regime change wars. What we're good at is overthrowing governments. And you think about what, just with Ukraine, Victoria Nuland, she orchestrated the Maidan coup, overthrew the Ukrainian government, and installed who she wanted in power.
Right.
It seems like we do this, and I feel like we think we're very good at it. And we have done it pretty well, very successfully. A lot of how many regime changes have we done? I saw something like we're doing like 1.5 a year or something like this.
It is something. It's in the, it's something like 40, 50 or something. It's way up there, or at least attempted regime changes.
Right. So you can make the argument that's what we're the best at. That's what our specialty is subterfuge, sort of. These covert operations to overthrow regimes, support the opposition, and create civil unrest in countries. And,
and there is this growing frustration. I mean, the idea is that we were going to overthrow Putin.
Right. We're quite open about regime change in Putin. And Victoria Nuland might be a person that thinks like, I'm a pro at this. I've done this before. I know how to hand out the cookies. I know how to talk to the right people, and we have the National Endowment for Democracy that'll pump in billions of dollars to support, whatever opposition. They tried Navalny and never really took anyone anywhere. So for me, I just thinking about this now, I could see how someone like Nuland would be like, I did it before. I can orchestrate a regime change within Russia. We can do something covert, asymmetric warfare, as you say, to create that unrest. Because another thing that you mentioned was that the original attack was most likely scheduled for March 8th, which would line up with the warning sent by the U.S. government to saying that there would be an imminent attack within 48 hours at a concert hall.
Just a few days before the election.
Right, just a few days before election, and this guy was is a patriotic singer, doing patriotic songs.
Right.
It's the perfect type of event to try to create unrest and to throw into question the election and to sort of, because everything I see the U.S. do, it's all about PR. It's all about creating that image and trying to push a story, control the narrative.
Right.
Is that so crazy to think?
The
U.S. was what I'm accusing or suggesting is that the United States used. Well, I hear this term "cutout" a lot. A CIA cutout or a Ukrainian cutout.
Right.
So that ISIS-K is a CIA cutout, or a Ukrainian. If it's Ukrainian, it means CIA.
Let's say it's something that exists in the shadows, but there's a lot of evidence suggests that in fact it is. And done by a mainstream.
You say a lot of evidence that suggests it is. What evidence?
There is
because this is just me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean that it's a cutout.
Imagination.
Cutout, right? I don't say that at this point we can actually accuse U.S. government of doing this. being behind this, hatching this plot or whatever. All I can say is that to think that it's a possibility is not at all crazy.
Right.
I wish we could say that it is. Forget about it, Charlie. Let's take your tinfoil hat off. But it's within the realm of possibility. Because one of the reasons is that there is definite evidence. That ISIS-K in fact is a CIA cutout. I mentioned the fact that they never attacked the U.S.
Only attacked U.S. enemies.
Right, exactly.
And then they operate in U.S. controlled military areas, right?
That's where they
Turkey,
began, right? Well, more than that, I guess it's the head of ISIS-K was a contractor or at Bagram Air Base, and very closely worked with U.S. intelligence.
Wait, sorry, say that again?
It was the head of ISIS-K, before ISIS-K was ever created, or was some kind of contractor at Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan.
Okay, that's pretty suspicious.
Right. And I mean, and it was more than that. I mean, he was actually working with, or, working in a department under the control of U.S. intelligence. And then he later had, he worked with other groups, but every one of these had CIA ties. And now and again, this is not just some sort of fringe theory or Russian talking points. This is a mainstream journalist. I think he writes for Rolling Stone, Seth Harp, and so he came out with a story actually talking about this years ago. And it was ignored, but he's brought it up again and say, hey, remember, this is who this guy is, and this is what ISIS-K is.
ISIS-K is.
Yeah, it has like CIA written all over it, and
it makes sense if you think about it. The CIA needs a boogeyman, right? They need to have they can justify in their mind. We got these kind of.
Well, yeah. I mean, they have. We all know that the CIA has worked with jihadists. All around the world. Of course, the most famous was Afghanistan during after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
That was the Taliban, right?
Yeah, no. The Taliban came later, but it's the Mujahideen. That's what we called them back then. But that's what Al Qaeda grew out of that.
Okay, right.
It grew out of that. And we use these jihadists to attack the Russians. So we have a history of doing that. And then, and it certainly happened in Syria. There was an Al-Qaeda offshoot called Al-Nusra. And again, American forces worked with them to attack the Assad government. So it's right.
It's crazy. I just came up with this train of thought. Now, do you feel the same way? That would you be, now it makes sense to me. I can connect the dots. The story makes sense to say that the ISIS-K is really an extension of the CIA, to some extent. Yeah,
well,
would you believe?
All I can say is that I'm just awfully suspicious. It just makes you wonder. You don't know how high up the chain of command it went, but it makes you wonder.
Okay, scary. Okay, one last thing, and then let's talk about Gaza. So what has the response been from Russia so far? How long has it been since the attack? 6 days or so, a week almost?
Uh-huh.
Russia, I've seen that they have increased missile attacks into Ukraine, targeting Kharkov, specifically energy sector. Is this, I think, a direct retaliation for the Crocus City attack? Have they given any indication of what their retaliation is going to be?
Well, I think as far as retaliation, they just said whoever is responsible or involved with this, will pay the price.
So what does that mean if it's us? That's what I'm scared about.
I know, right? I think that they're probably scared about that too.
Who? Our government?
No. I mean, the Russians might be.
Because that's oh boy, right? It's the fight between the two most powerful nations in the world,
right? They certainly have launched a series of very, large scale and highly destructive, missile attacks on Ukraine. Yeah, largely targeting the electrical infrastructure. And Yeah, they've been devastatingly effective. I think, Kharkov has been without power for a few days, and other parts of the lights are just going out all around Ukraine.
Mm.
This is a real escalation. It's a real change. If you remember, I guess it was the winter of 2022, 2023. So, a little over a year ago, there were a number, of attacks, maybe a dozen or dozens on Ukraine's electrical system, but they never hit power plants. They only hit substations, the distribution system, and they did do a fair amount of damage. They certainly degraded the system. One thing, expecting it turns out that again, there's certain things the Soviets did right or they overdid, and one of them was apparently electrical infrastructure. So they had apparently, instead of having just 100% capacity, they had 150% capacity. They had more than enough. So even the Russians ended up taking out that 50%. And so that or maybe a little bit more. So they did a lot of damage to it, but still the system, with chewing gum and rubber bands, was able to continue to function, and the lights stayed on. But it was clear that they were, had made a conscious choice not to go after the power plants. But now, obviously, they've entered a new phase and they are attacking the power plants. Now, they haven't said that this was in retaliation for the Crocus City attack. There also have been some attacks, let's say, on refineries in Russia by Ukrainian drones. They haven't said that it was in retaliation for those attacks. I think that, just knowing the Russians, I think they don't, they're not interested in PR only peripherally.
They don't telegraph what they're doing.
Yeah, they don't. I think this was probably in the works for a while. They had decided that they were going to do this at this point for some reason. And they may have chosen this time because it was just kind of easier to justify a kind of escalation at this time.
Right.
But I think, but I think this is something that we're going to do. The fact is that they have been showing remarkable restraint, compared to the U.S. and, for example, in its attacks on Iraq. I think in the first couple of weeks, the U.S. knocked out, all the entire power system and power infrastructure in Iraq, and more than that, they took out water, everything, all kinds of infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. The state, it was for a military purpose. I guess, when you don't have electricity, it's hard for everybody, but it's also hard, it makes the military, especially in a place like Ukraine where all transportation, or the vast majority of transportation, is done by rail, and the rail is powered by electricity. So there is a military, logic behind this. We take this out. Now they're not going to be able to move their troops around, move their equipment up to the front line. It makes logistics much more difficult for the Ukrainians. Now, why at this time? Well, maybe they're getting ready for an offensive. And, maybe it's going to be directed, for example, in the Kharkov area. And so there's one reason why, you would want to just take out that particular.
Yeah, there's been definitely increased rhetoric amongst, I would just say, the speaking heads in Russia, not Putin or Russian governments, but the media calls to level Kharkov, because a lot of these attacks into Russia, into Belgorod region, are coming from Kharkov. So it seems like there is public pressure now to do more. For sure, after this.
Right. Well, I think Putin himself has said that we do have to do something about Kharkov, to protect Belgorod and Kursk.
And I believe, I don't know if you heard this, I believe the one sign that Kharkov might be ready to fall is because the Kazakh government issued a warning to all Kazakh citizens living in Kharkov to evacuate, to leave. And it seems like perhaps Russia told Kazakhstan that, look, something's going to happen. But like we said, Russia is actually surprisingly good at the opposite of the Ukrainian United States, of being silent and not letting people know what their intentions are. They don't telegraph it. They're not saying, look at our counteroffensive. They've made no mention of an official offensive happening.
Right.
But there are some small signs pointing towards an offensive coming soon.
Right.
Okay, and we don't even know if any of this has anything to do with the Crocus City Hall music attack.
I don't think it would.
This is just a military operation. It was the same goal. It might have sped up the timeline, but the retaliation for Crocus City Hall, we don't know what that will be.
Right.
If there will be something, and who it'll be directed at.
Right. Maybe the timing again, I would say, of this intensification of missile attacks might have something to do with. They might say this is the time.
Maybe to appease the public a little bit.
Because sort of like kill two birds with one stone. This is something we're going to do.
Now we got to show that we're doing something now.
Right.
Okay, scary stuff, but let's move to another scary theater, and that's the Middle East. So things have definitely heated up in Ukraine in the past week or so. What's it looking like in Gaza right now? Last we talked about it, we were talking about 1 million people that were on the verge of starvation.
Right. I think it's only gotten worse. I mean, as far as that goes, they're not getting the food they need and more.
I'm seeing actual videos of children starving to death.
Right.
Horrific. And recently there was a UN Security Council vote. They do this, seems like every week a country puts forward a vote for a ceasefire. And the United States is the only country that vetoes and says no ceasefire, except for this time, the U.S. abstained.
Right.
And every other country voted for a ceasefire. But
then this time Britain voted for it, whereas before they abstained.
Right. So so we're seeing a shift. It shows that there's a lot of pressure. People are like, we need this ceasefire.
Right.
It's a bad look when we see all these children starving to death on the streets.
Yeah.
But there's something a little bit strange about the Security Council vote. There was I don't. You can maybe help me unpack it. They're saying that it's a non-binding resolution. What does that mean? What is it? How do these votes work? Can kind of tell me the gears of the UN?
Okay.
What is the purpose of it if they do say something and it's non-binding? Does it mean anything?
Well, sometimes some of them clearly are non-binding when they say we call upon so and so to do this. That means that we're asking you to do this. But in this case, they said demand, and everybody knows what demand means. There's really no wriggle room with demand.
But we're trying to wriggle.
Yeah, I know. Of course, that's what. But this is just typical. I mean, it's just that the U.S. is walking a tightrope. I mean, I think clearly what's behind this is that I don't think this signals a real change in U.S. policy or a weakening of U.S. support for the Israeli government. But it is a sign that the U.S. government is really feeling the pressure. They've been hurt badly by this Gaza fiasco. We've talked about how Israel's international standing has suffered greatly. But ours has suffered along with them because we're clearly the enablers. We're standing by them. We're making all this possible, and everybody knows it. And it's also hurting Biden domestically. There's a lot of anger in the Democratic base, or parts of the Democratic base. And again, there's a real chance that those Arab voters in Michigan, for example, will just stay home and won't cast their votes for Biden. And that if he loses Michigan, he's liable to lose the election. So yeah, they're really feeling the pressure. Now, it's just typically as they always do, they don't ever really change anything. It's the same old policy. They're continuing to support Israel. They could actually stop. They could make this a binding resolution, right? I mean, they could simply say, okay, yeah, this has been passed, Israel. Okay, we're not going to send you anything. But Biden,
is this resolution binding? They say demand. Isn't that binding?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the general understanding. I mean, I think it's just this really absurd word game that we're playing. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, the word game that I've heard, it's absurd, and I don't think anybody takes it seriously. But it's just an effort to kind of have our cake and eat it too. It's just that okay, we let this happen. Okay, this is a clear signal, that to the Netanyahu government, that he better do something. He better change course. But at the same time, just by the fact that, we immediately undercut it by saying that it's non-binding, we're letting Netanyahu know that he's free to go on, with to continue this course.
So do we have that power? Can we just say what anything is? We say, oh, well, we say it's binding, or we say it's non-binding. Then what is? Do we have that ability? How can we do that? What is the point of the UN Security Council if we can just say, well, we disagree with everybody else that says it's binding, we're just going to say it's non-binding, and everybody has to go along with it? Is that how it works?
Well, the thing is, okay, with this, there's simply a demand. Okay, there wasn't, if everybody does agree with it, for example, the UN resolutions can have a real impact if there is a unanimous vote.
There was, though. Only one abstained.
Yeah, one abstained, but the problem was us. And so it's
but nobody voted against, so everybody voted for.
Yeah, well, see, how do you enforce it? There's really two ways. You can have sanctions, or you can have, send UN troops, right? And to do that, the sanctions, you have to have a separate resolution, because this didn't actually specify any penalties. It's simply, if
actually, sorry, just before we dive into it, maybe we should just quickly say exactly what was in this resolution. Well, what do you know the terms?
Right. There was a demand, for an immediate ceasefire, a demand, to open the border crossings and allow food aid in unimpeded. There was a demand for Hamas to release all the hostages, and I think there was something else, but those are the main things.
Okay, sounds pretty reasonable.
Right.
So what is our issue? why do we say abstain and say it's non-binding? I think we know the answer.
Yeah, we know the answer. Right.
It's just because we can't say no to Israel, and Israel wants to. Netanyahu wants to level Gaza.
Right.
And so does that mean that this UN Security Council resolution is meaningless? Is that what we're saying?
Well, yeah, it doesn't have any teeth. The only way it could have teeth is you follow it up with, let's say, because Israel didn't comply with these demands, we are now going to impose these sanctions on Israel.
So
for example, that happened to Iraq, and everybody in Iraq suffered terribly. And actually, these, and these things, again, hundreds of thousands of people starved to death in Iraq, because this is actually, you think about it, it's ironic. UN resolution led to the starvation of many people. We can't seem to prevent the starvation of people.
Right. That's that famous Madeleine Albright interview where on 60 Minutes where it asked, the 500,000 Iraqi children have starved to death.
Yeah.
Do you think that the cost is worth it? And she's like, it's difficult, but we think it's worth it.
Yeah, basically that's what she said. Not exactly those words.
Yeah,
sometimes
close.
You have to pay the price. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you can look that up on YouTube, Madeleine Albright, 60 Minutes. Okay, so basically nothing is changing, but there is a tone shift a bit, ratcheting up. Basically, all this UN resolution is saying is that governments are feeling the pressure, and the U.S. government and the British government. The British government voted for a ceasefire.
Right, actually,
first time they ever did.
Right.
They always abstained, and the U.S. first time they didn't veto.
Right. They abstained.
Right. And it's a weird tightrope that I feel like we're walking, because I heard that Benjamin Netanyahu was furious that we didn't veto it, and canceled this trip to Washington, or our delegation there, and saying, and just to show his displeasure and how upset he is.
Right. Though I heard that there was another delegation at the Pentagon, and they didn't come home. They continued working out the details, probably of the next shipment.
It makes you kind of wonder, is Netanyahu more powerful than Biden? Because clearly Biden wants a ceasefire.
Right.
He wants it, but
I think he actually does. It's not because he cares a bit about any Palestinian child. I'm afraid, to say that. I don't like to say it, but I think that's true.
He wants to win. He wants to get reelected. He's a political animal.
Right.
We understand it's election year, and clearly
it's hurting him.
He can't focus on Ukraine. That's going pretty bad. He can't focus on the Middle East. He's got two huge disasters on his hand.
Right.
And having 1 million, 2 million people starve to death under your watch is not a good look. Genocide Joe is not a good nickname.
Right.
So why doesn't he just force there's all of these aid trucks that are piled up miles long. Right. Why doesn't he just say, we're going in, we'll escort these aid trucks in? And wouldn't that make him look so good? Look, we're reading all this relief. He can now be the hero and roll in and save
Well,
his
I
people
mean,
on the brink of starvation. He clearly wants it. They abstained from the vote. Who's in charge? Is it Netanyahu that's in charge?
Well, in a way, maybe not. I wouldn't go quite that far, but I think what I said before was true. There's two things: that he is a committed Zionist. Whatever he says. I mean, he's also a political animal. He wants to get reelected, but he is truly a very committed Zionist. And I think if he didn't pay any cost for this, he would be turning over the entire arsenal to Israel. And that's he's always taken that position. I don't think there's any reason to doubt that continues to be his position. He's always provided Israel with unconditional support, and he will continue to do that. But that's just half of it. But on the other hand, he is a political animal, like you're saying, just like Netanyahu is. But he is also very dependent on major donors, as we're saying, and these major donors, without exception, are just very Zionist,
right?
And more than we want to admit it, but money really does control a lot of politics in the U.S.
I feel like
so. This is why you say, okay, his solution is, okay, we're going to keep on taking money from these donors, we got to, and we're going to keep on supporting Israel, but we're going to abstain on this resolution and
it's lip service for
and continually express how we feel the pain of the Palestinian people, but meanwhile everything will go forward as is. But if maybe there will be a change in the rhetoric, a change. And
it's hard for me to think that the money from the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, these wealthy Zionist donors, would outweigh a genocide or a million dead children.
I know.
How, is that
well, I mean, but I think it does. I mean, it's just these people just don't. And it's very sad but true. But the people who rise to the top in politics, at least in the West today, are people without a conscience.
Maybe that was true 25 years ago when you had just a few major news networks that control things, but now.
That's
people
why
can
feeling
see it on TikTok,
right.
on now that's why one of the reasons maybe they're trying to ban TikTok. But on X, he's not able to control the narrative as much. So if surely he has people in his administration and working on his campaign that can be like, look, the money is important, but people have a voice and people can see it and hear it, and so
so I think that's probably what they are telling him, and this is his solution. Okay, we're going to continue to take money. In other words, we're not going to change our policy. Otherwise, the Saban and all these other top donors, who really, are providing us with a war chest for the campaign in the fall. They're going to stop. They're going to stop writing the checks, and we just can't let that happen. But I got this great plan. We'll do this and that, and the other thing we'll abstain on this vote, and we're gonna have Kamala Harris will go out and say this and show how deeply concerned she is about Palestinian suffering, and every time chance I get, I'll shed a few tears over Palestine, and that should do it, right?
Something that just seems to be clear from this is that these international organizations like the United Nations, the UN, the International Criminal Court, they're not truly international. There seem to be just, if the U.S. can just...
Well, the UN, the UN really is. The International Criminal Court is not. I mean, it is a creature of the West. That's why we got those absurd decisions like the one to issue an arrest warrant for Putin for apparently kidnapping children in Ukraine or something. This is just totally absurd. But the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, that is a UN organization, and they did. Even the American judge on the court, voted. It was a 15-2 vote. really against Israel. It's
Right.
not what Israel wanted. And no matter how much the media in the U.S. and the West tried to spin it, it was,
It was damning.
a very damning
Who
report.
said there's a
Right.
plausible case for genocide here,
Right,
so that
right.
it's moving forward.
And actually, the ICJ has come forward because they said they're now issuing just a demand that Israel immediately, like before that there was a high risk of starvation. Now it's active, it's happening.
Right,
They're
but
starting to death, and they're issuing. So I mean,
but we're just saying that
is,
but they may make this demand, but then the U.S. says it's non-binding. And have any aid trucks crossed? Have we seen any change since this resolution?
No,
This resolution passed. Today is March 29th. This was what 3 days ago, March 26th or something, that this resolution went through. And so that's why I'm saying that these aren't truly an international. It's an international organization, but the U.S. still can control any decision, is what we're saying.
Yeah, or at least they can sabotage any decision, and it does have. It's obvious that the U.S. has outsized influence within the United Nations. I mean, there are a lot of agencies, like what was it, the one on the chemical weapons? It turned out that under pressure from the U.S., they were really cooking the books, so to speak. Suppressing data about investigations that have been done in Syria, for example. The U.S. does have a lot of influence, but overall, clearly the U.S. does not control the United Nations. Look at the votes, and just these resolutions don't have any teeth, but they are embarrassing. They do have an impact on the United States global image. There's no question. And, increasingly the U.S. is looking isolated, is isolated on this question.
Do we feel like that there's going to be an incursion into Rafah soon? What are some developments? It seems like status quo. People are just starving now, and nothing is changing.
Right.
And there's talk about going into Rafah, which is basically the last city left in Gaza, where there are over 1.5 million people. Basically, the remaining population is all there.
They've been driven there.
They've been driven there because everything else has been destroyed.
Right.
And now Netanyahu is saying that they're going to go into Rafah. We say don't go into Rafah. Has there been any sign that this is going to happen? Do you think it is going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I've heard that. I think the Israelis intend to do it. But I've heard that they're delaying, not because they're having any pangs of conscience or anything like that, but simply they're not ready to do it. I mean, they can certainly bomb it, but if they're going to go in and actually try to get Hamas, a fight in that dense urban environment, they're going to suffer a lot of casualties, and they just don't have the capability. So it may be that they're just trying to prepare, or they may just choose to starve the population out, or they'll just bomb from a distance. I'm not sure really.
The U.S. and Israel, we're the kings of asymmetrical warfare. We don't seem to be capable of regular warfare. Well, are there any other tensions building with Hezbollah or political pressure? Any changes that you see impending, or is it still kind of just holding the course and people are just starving to death? People get blown up by bombs and drones. What I've seen. Just constant.
Right. Yeah, there's actually, the fighting has been less intense, but it hasn't stopped. And, every day, there are dozens and, often 100 or more Gazans killed. And who knows, I don't know how many are starving to death every day now. But that number is surely going to increase.
Do you think as it starts to build up to a point that is just unconscionable, what is going to happen? Yeah,
well, that's a big question. I mean, it's obviously putting a strain on Israel supporters. It seems like Israel, I mean, just again, if you look at the opinion polls, there's really no pressure within Israel to let up. And actually the pressure is only to intensify, is to press harder, to kill more Gazans. I mean, that's the sad truth. But outside of Israel, there's just a growing pressure that the support for Israel is eroding every day. At least there are these governments, I think, are just like, Biden, the Western governments are just as committed to Israel as ever, France, the UK, Germany, so forth. but yeah, they're squirming. They like Biden. They're uncomfortable. A lot of their own people are obviously very unhappy. They're voters. Um, they wish they would all go away somehow, and yeah, they would like to see a ceasefire. But I don't think they really. If Israel just starves them all or drives them out into the Negev desert, they'll wring their hands and there will be some perfunctory, denunciations. But I just think these are people. These governments are morally bankrupt, and they won't. They really won't change their policy towards Israel. That's my fear, is that it's just this is going to happen. I mean, the West, though, they clearly. Actually, this has just hurt the Israel supporters, as it's made Israel itself a pariah. But in the end, I don't think that these people are capable of actually turning against Israel and supporting the Palestinians in any meaningful way. And what my fear is that it'll happen. It'll either they'll be driven out of Gaza. Gaza will be thoroughly ethnically cleansed, or a combination of ethnic cleansing and just starvation and death from bombing and shooting. And yeah, there will be a wringing of hands, and there will be slapping of wrists. But a lot of these governments, both in Europe, the U.S., but also in the Arab world, a lot of these governments too are just morally bankrupt, and they really don't care about the Palestinians. Again, it hurts them. They're nervous. They don't like this. Their own populations are at a boiling point. In places like Egypt and Jordan and so forth. And there is a potential for some kind of revolution, but these governments are hoping that they can stave off a revolution. They can do enough, through rhetoric and maybe at the symbolic level, cutting diplomatic relations or whatever, to stave off a revolution. And maybe they'll get away with it, and maybe this horrible thing will happen. And then, and the others, there are some governments that are obviously anti-Zionist, like or non-state actors like Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and of course the Houthis are acting, but Hezbollah and like Iran just though clearly they are, anti-Zionist, they do want to support, the Palestinians. They do support them, but they just may choose not to risk a full-scale war with Israel. There's always the risk that it could go nuclear, and they may just stay back.
Is there any pressure or way for some kind of diplomatic solution through nations such as China or Russia or Brazil? Because most of the world, we're using this term global south, but I think the term people are using now is global majority.
Right.
Is against this.
Right. The vast majority. Really
right.
Is.
So don't they have any levers they can pull to try to stop this madness in Gaza? Or
well, I'm sure. Well, that there are probably all kinds of
but the only thing
but
it's the United States.
The thing is, first of all, it seems at this point like Israel just doesn't care. I mean, they know they are becoming a pariah, but it's almost like they're reveling in it. It's just like, we always knew the world hated us. They're all anti-Semites,
Yeah.
And we got the U.S. behind us, and so far they've been proven right. That's the thing. Now, maybe, just maybe, the perhaps, I can't say that it can't happen, that that Biden or a new administration might actually, clamp down on supplies to Israel, and Israel will pull back. But that's going to be, the Israelis don't want to do that. I mean, it's like we've said before, where the whole purpose of this was to kind of reestablish that fear among the Arabs. And this October 7th attack, and then this war since, the failure to defeat Hamas. You say, okay, you're showing you're really good at killing women and children. That doesn't make us fear you. It just makes us hate you. So, I mean, the hatred of Israel has intensified, greatly since October 7th. But the fear has not been reestablished. And Israel knows this. This is what they're that's what makes the situation so dangerous.
Right.
And maybe they'll just be forced to walk away, but they don't want to. And right now, you don't see any signs that they're willing to entertain it.
I feel like the calculation that Netanyahu is making, he has I think he's trying to set out a policy he's got to fine tune how many people he can kill at one point in time. So, if we can just starve a couple thousand a day and it doesn't get two, and then we let in a few aid trucks, because if we go into Rafah and just bomb it and level it and we kill 1 million people in a week, it's going to look too bad. But if we kill 1 million slowly over a span of a year...
That sounds really horrible, but I think you're right. I mean, because Israel has a record of doing that. I mean, if for people who have followed, the developments in Palestine closely over the last couple of decades, that's what we've seen.
Right. They have a policy called mowing the lawn.
Right.
Which is they would go in every couple of years, kill a couple thousand, trim it down till it get like, all right, every week we just instill that fear again.
Right. Yeah, but more than that, in places like the West Bank, I mean, there's just, as you well know, there's just this constant, never ending, cutting down of olive groves, seizing of land, the shooting of,
water tanks.
Or just, shooting teenagers and or raids where they take prisoners and shoot the head of the household and whatever. These things just happen all the time,
right?
And it's just it's okay. Yeah, they stop short of actually just of driving all the West Bank Palestinians out of the desert, but they're just making life so miserable for them. And they didn't go in and seize all their land at once, but over the last since 1967, they have taken like half of that land.
Right.
You can see that the maps are available. There's some very striking maps that show you how it's changed over the years. And it's just an incremental. And I think they're doing that. It's incremental because for the reason that you notice, okay, we cut down this olive grove. We drive the people out of this one village, or we declare this, now it's territory for the settlers. They build their settlement, and then 3 years later, they go over the ridge and they take the next village. It leads to some protests. Some European governments say, "Oh, you shouldn't do this."
Right.
And then that's that. And then it goes on. And they can just get so there's just sort of a murmur of discontent, from the West. But that's all it is. And so they've kept it there. Now this has been greatly accelerated, but I think that's we are seeing something, just the same policy at a much more intense and cruel level. Okay, let's not drop a nuclear bomb and kill them all at once. That would be really bad press. Okay, but if we do this, we think that if that happens, maybe even Biden might turn his back on us. And, maybe even the Brits will say, okay, forget the Zionists. But if we just kill, 1,000 a day or a few hundred a day, for the next couple of years, they'll wring their hands and say, oh, we wish, you wouldn't do that, but they'll be with us.
Right. We'll send in an aid truck every other day to kind of show that we're good guys, and just slowly let them starve. Clearly don't give them enough to actually survive, or rebuild, or anything like that.
Right. Because they have been doing that to Gaza. I mean, they put them on. In fact, it was some government official in Israel said, we kind of laughingly, we put them on a starvation diet. They have been restricting food into Gaza for years and years and years. And now it's just, they're just restricting it that much more.
Okay. Okay, well, we're coming up to an hour. So I'm just going to ask you one last question real quick. Before we were sort of comparing the two conflicts, Ukraine and the Middle East, and saying which one was more volatile or explosive. And we kind of came to the conclusion that there was no off-ramp available for the Middle East situation with Gaza and Israel. The Ukraine situation is very, very dangerous, but there are available off-ramps. But in light of recent events, do you feel that now the Ukraine situation is becoming more dangerous, even more so than what's happening in the Middle East, or are we...
Oh my, yeah.
They're both bad.
Yeah, right. I think what I said before is still true. It's just that it is easier for the U.S. to walk away from Ukraine, much easier than it is to walk away from Israel. The problem is, like as we were saying, is that there is some real identification with Israel in the U.S. among a significant portion of the population, and there really isn't for Ukraine. The U.S. would, I think it's just easier for the U.S. to pull out. Now it's of course, because as the Crocus City Hall incident does complicate that some. It increases the risks. How if indeed the U.S. is behind that? Well, that does kind of
turn up the heat a bit,
quite a bit,
raise the stakes. Okay, all right, we'll end it there. Okay, thank you very much, Dad.